My microphone broke. Anything you want to say? Oh,
It's making a mess.
we've all watched Euphoria, okay? But as a curious cat, I kind of wanted to go deeper. I've been seeing and watching a lot of video essays just kind of talking about like colors and how it's used in the show to kind of show the character progression at that time. So I wanted to kind of learn a little bit more about the inner workings of like how shows are written, how plays, like how minds think of this. Like the character is sad, but we're not gonna show that by them just wearing blue. We're gonna like make it make it different. I don't know. And like even plays, because that's something that I find really interesting. I love the show Cabaret, and the first time I ever saw that ending, like jaw to the floor. That's such genius. Like I want to know how they came up with that. Like, yeah, this is what we're gonna do, and this is exactly how we're gonna do it. I'm trying not to spoil because yeah, so that's exactly what I did today, and that's exactly what this episode of the, by the way, welcome, Teen Writer's Block podcast is all about. I'm your host, Amberleigh Q, and here we talk about all things writing for teens, and just have a good time and whatnot. Yeah. What was I gonna say? Yes, today I brought on the dear Katie PrIscott. She is a phenomenal playwright. She is from my state, Connecticut, and she currently goes to Oberlin College. And she's written so many plays. She's written a lot of 10-minute plays, and then like one-act plays. And she's also written a full-length play called Something Borrowed, which is the main topic of this interview because it's so good and so funny. One day it's gonna come out, and y'all are gonna watch it and cackle because the girl's talented. So grab your tea, your fun drink. I have iced tea over there, that's why I said tea. Popcorn, snack, a little snack, and let's get into this. Oh, also, just like to let you know, this is gonna be like a two-parter, or like a multi-parter, just because my attention span is like approximately -3 seconds. So I wanted to make sure that y'all weren't getting too bored. So I'm gonna kind of like split it up. Put your hands together for the one and only Miss Katie PrIscott. Welcome once again. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. I'm doing wonderful. Happy to be here.
That's what I love to hear. Can you introduce yourself briefly?
Yeah, I'm Katie PrIscott. Ooh, and now it's just on me. I'm Katie PrIscott. I am a junior at Oberlin College studying creative writing and arts administration. And yeah, I just love to write stuff.
Fabulous. Okay, so I know that you're a playwright, right? And that's kind of like your main situation. Can you kind of tell me how you got into theater? It's kind of more of a niche subject or something that, writing is such a huge category. What made you kind of zero in on plays and theater in general?
Ooh, this is going to be a long one. So I started taking theater classes when I was 6 years old, and the story is like so cheesy because we saw Annie at my local regional theater, and it hit intermission, and I literally pointed to the stage as I think I must have been like 5, being like, "Mom, I want to do that. How do I do that?" And both of my parents are athletes, and so they were like, okay, how does this work?" And so after that, she put me in classes. I'd already done like the little tap ballet dance class that literally every girl our age has done. But with playwriting, I had done like writing through school and all that stuff, like English class. That was always my favorite subject. But it was kind of a COVID thing of I couldn't do shows. I was just like feeling very creatively like stuck because it's a really hard thing. I was a junior in high school when I was a sophomore when COVID started. I was a junior when it was like the thick of it. And it was just a really hard time to be 16, as many people know. And my high school drama teacher put out a post of like, hey, they're doing this 10-minute play competition. Write something. And it was my Thanksgiving break. And I was like, okay, sure, let's see how this goes. And genuinely, I wrote it all, the first draft, obviously went through edits. I wrote the first draft in one sitting. And I was like, oh, this is fun. I like this. And then that became a one act, and then it'll become really important in the story later. But yeah, I was just kind of hooked, and I thought it was so interesting to be able to write in such a dialogue driven format, and something where like what I wrote wasn't the only thing that ended up being important, like the direction and the acting. Like mine was what I brought to the table was like the basis, versus a novel or something like that where you are responsible for everything. It was collaborative, even though I was like sitting in my room writing by myself because we were all quarantining.
Absolutely. I relate to that story so heavily. Being 16, ooh, we're in the trenches, you know?
It's so hard. I don't envy anyone in that spot.
Yeah, but it's just, I love your story because it's so relatable. I mean, and like writing it all in one sitting, I think that's one of the most magical parts of being a writer, you know? Like you can just write, and it's so kind of freeing and therapeutic in a sense, you know?
Absolutely, yeah.
Do you feel personally, as someone who is currently indulging in education, that education in itself can help you grow as a writer? Or do you think there are other aspects or organizations or anything that can help you improve more as a writer rather than college or further education?
Oh my gosh. I think it's a combination of things. I feel like that's such a cop-out answer of like, it depends. But I transferred to Oberlin last year. I was initially in my freshman year, I was in a journalism and strategic communications degree at a different school. I was going to get my bachelor's in journalism, and I learned so much from that program. The school didn't end up being the right fit, and so I ended up picking transfer applications and going through that. But I was still playwriting while I was in that journalism department. And even like when I started, it was something that I went out of my way to do because I was given a poster in Google Classroom. And so I think it's a combination of things. So I've taken a lot, I've been very lucky to take a lot of writing workshop classes, and specifically playwriting, but also like fiction and poetry and all that stuff. And I've gotten so much out of those, but also it's kind of like life experience of, if you look at when I started writing versus now, my voice has changed, not just because of like the writing classes I've taken, but also just because I'm older. I just turned 20. Like there's a life experience aspect. There's a like, do you watch a lot of TV or theater or things like that and go, oh, I like how that person writes. Let me look them up. Oh, I read this book. Let me like follow up on this author and figure out what it is that does that. So I think that I'm absolutely huge proponent of education, but like I'm not getting a degree in playwriting. It's more broad than that. And even if I had stayed in my journalism degree, I think I probably would have kept playwriting and other writing. So yeah, long way to say it depends.
No, absolutely. I get it. And I think it truly does. Your answer was absolutely perfect. I mean, it all depends on the person as well, but truly, it's all up to you.
That's the thing. Like no one's forcing me to do this. Like,
exactly.
My play was not written for class. I was asked a lot like, oh, did you write this on assignment? And I was like, no, I was taking 20 credits of other stuff, and this just kind of happened. Like,
right. Exactly. First of all, happy birthday, by the way. How does it feel being 20?
Oh my gosh, I've had several crises over. I'm very lucky to have very nice friends. It's mirrored, but like we hung up balloons and all that stuff. It was really wonderful of them. But yeah, especially like because I feel like I write a lot about like coming of age and growing up and all these things. I've been very cerebral about it.
Yeah. Girl, I get it. Since it was just your birthday, can I ask what age you were when you first had your play on the big stage?
I had a 10-minute play. My high school drama department did a program called Senior Scene. It still does. It still exists. Even though I'm not there. But when I was 17 and a senior in high school, I directed a 10-minute play that I had written. And so that was kind of the first time. It was different because I have no intentions of being a director. I don't think that's where my skill set lies. But that was the first time that I had something I had written shown to other people in that way, because it was January 2022. And so I was 17.
So how did it feel for the first time when you saw your play on the big stage? You know, I know a lot of people have different feelings on it, but I want to know yours specifically.
Oh my gosh, I was nauseous. I was sweaty. It was kind of gross. But yeah, and it was also really interesting because it was my first time putting up my own writing. But the whole point of Senior Scenes is that you, like, the upperclassmen work with the underclassmen. And so I was like directing a first year and a second year. And so I was trying not to freak them out and be like, hey, I care a lot about this. This is like my brainchild. But yeah, it was terrifying. But it was crazy because then it happens, and it's one of those things of when you're in a show or even on the crew or anything where you're near the stage, you can do something if something goes wrong. And I had this sense of like, this is out of my hands. I wrote this, I printed it out, they memorized it, it's in their hands now. And it's paralyzing, but it's also really freeing. And so what they were like halfway through and I was like, oh, I'm actually kind of enjoying myself now. I'm not just like hyperventilating. It was wild experience. And it's still wild every time.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds wild. I could never, I mean, I've written a couple of, well, I've dabbled, but I could never imagine like seeing something that I put so much work into, like on the big stage, like the nerves. I mean, you're brave.
Thank you. And the other wild thing is like, especially with like the way that I write, oftentimes I do write things in one sitting, but then like I'll be like walking on campus or eating dinner with my family or things like that. And a line will come to me and I'll like put it in my notes app. And so I'll be like pulling from all these different places. And so sometimes I'll hear a line and be like, oh, I remember when I was having this conversation with my brother and he said this. And I said, can I put that in my notes app? And so it's just, it's hard to explain, which is ridiculous because like words are my whole thing. But yeah.
Well, I get it. I mean, a loss for words. I really, truly, and I think that's so beautiful how you can look at your work and be like, there's some of me in there. That's some of my brother, you know? We're kind of on the topic of the big stage. I want to ask how closely you work with directors during your process.
Okay. It kind of depends. I've had a couple 10-minute plays. I've had a couple of one acts, but the experience I'm probably going to talk about, I had my first full-length play done in a staged reading, so not a full production. We were doing like music stands, script in hand. They had a week to do it, and they were incredible. I'm going to rave about them to the ends of the earth. And I'm like grinning as I'm talking about them. Shay Frimmer is one of my dear, dear friends and is at Northwestern studying theater. It's their first day of class today. Yeah, like they are one of my favorite directors to work with, and they're someone I trust so deeply with my work because there's this boundary line that's really interesting when you're developing new work of like, I know that there's still stuff I want to work on, but they're working on like putting up the best version of this script. And so even though I know I want to cut this and, oh, I don't like how that's phrased anymore now that I've heard someone say it, things like that, they are so cautious and so careful about like doing what my vision was at the time. And so I feel like me being like working with directors, because like I've been very lucky to work with some of my very close friends, but in general I think it's an interesting dynamic with new work of like how I never give actors acting notes. I go, hey Shay, I meant the line to be written like this, they're saying it like this, how do we communicate that? Is that an edit I need to make, or is that an acting note you need to give? And so yeah, I think it depends on the work. My answer to everything is going to be it depends, because it always depends. But I love working with directors and I love having those conversations and kind of seeing how I can like funnel my thought into getting what we both want.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think your it depends are kind of perfect because as a writer, it's all so subjective and personal, you know? So there's never really one answer.
Yeah.
I think that's why we write, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
But that's so fun that you get to work with so many of your friends. It's such like a nurturing environment too, you know what I mean? To like be able to work with your friends on something you're so passionate about.
Yeah, and like in development for my full length, I had like an Act 1 draft and I was able to like wrangle some of my friends here to read it. And at that point, I had Act 2 somewhat outlined, but like that was collaborative of like, hey, what do you think she's gonna do? How do you think that he's gonna react to this? Things like that. In a show where it's maybe like a 2-person show or a show where it's a musical, obviously you'll approach that differently. But because my work's often very like character-driven, ensemble-y, like it's all collaborative to me.
Since we're also still on kind of the topic of the process, can I ask if you ever have like a role in the casting, and if you do, how is that? Like, is it a difficult decision? How does it work?
I mean, because I'm at the point where I'm at, like still in school, still working with a lot of my friends as my peers, I do tend to have a little bit of a note in the casting. But with my full length Something Borrowed, that was a really cool process because Shay brought in some of the people that they knew, and then I had a couple people that I knew. One of the characters, Larry, I literally wrote the role for a former director of mine, former teacher of mine. And so we knew we had to have George. And once we got George, everything else fell into place. But a lot of the people had never met before. And so it was like those true crime boards with the red string of like, oh, this person knows this person. And this person didn't realize that they knew this person, but they actually have a mutual friend. It's a show about like old friends and the fact that they all became friends and they clicked like from the first rehearsal. It's not something that I can take any credit for because it just happened. But at this point, yes, in the future, can't say that I will, but I feel really lucky that I have like some really talented people that I've grown up with and really talented people that I've gotten to meet through hearing them say my words and being like, oh my God, I didn't know that this could be this cool. Like,
Yeah, absolutely. By the way, I've read your play. Thank you for sending it to me. And it was so fun. I had such a great time. Like I would be in class, like I would be reading it on the low. It's just fantastic job. But I really did feel the community between all of the characters, and I loved how you were truly able to incorporate it, right? Because I think a lot of writers tend to have issues kind of with that. But it was so genuine from your part. And I'm glad that it was kind of able to mirror through the casting and the cast and stuff like that.
thank you so much for saying that. That's so kind.
I'm just being honest. I'm telling you. But since you kind of, have been with the cast, can you tell us like maybe a memorable moment or a story that you have specifically with the Something Borrowed cast or the cast previously?
Oh my goodness. Amy was playing Violet and George was playing Larry. And it was the second night of the reading. And admittedly, we all talked about this at intermission. Like the audience was laughing at completely different things than they did the night before and like not reacting at all to things that I thought were like big reaction moments, but then things that I thought were kind of throwaway lines or kind of like fillery, transition-y bits. They thought that those were the funniest things in the world. And so that's kind of like the context we were existing in. We did not fall out of the coconut tree, et cetera, et cetera. There's a scene in Act 2, because you've read it, but for the general listeners, there's a scene where Violet and Larry kind of have this heart-to-heart because she's like really scared about getting married and she has all these things going on in her life, and he gives her this advice, and they made each other cry on stage, which is just a testament. They are both incredibly talented actors and incredible human beings and embodied it so beautifully. But they made each other cry. And then someone told me after the fact that they had forgotten that I had written it. Like they understood that they were like watching a play, but at the same time they were like, wow, he's so wise. Like what great advice he's giving. And then had to remind themselves like, oh, Katie wrote that. Like that's not just him saying it. And so the fact that like George was able to do that and make it seem so effortless, and the fact that like they had that connection and they had met on Monday and this was Saturday and they made each other cry on stage, like it's craziness. But yeah, that was just rocked my world a little bit.
I'm just gonna attribute some of that credit to you because even though you obviously wrote it, the fact that you and the directors that you worked with were able to cultivate such a class that would truly just like mesh together like that, and also the fact that your writing was able to communicate how wise Larry was supposed to be, it's just props everywhere.
Oh my gosh.
I'm going to move away a little bit from the production aspect, and I want to move towards your career as a playwright. I know you kind of explained a little bit, but did you indulge a lot in playwriting specifically as a child, or was it more like a new thing?
Not playwriting in the I am writing a play. I had done those writing aside, like when it would be like, you're done with work in elementary school, you can do this, this, and this. And whenever there was a writing prompt, I was writing. Like, as I said, English was always my favorite class. I loved to read. I was that kid reading a book on the playground. I was such a stinking nerd. But I thought of that and theater as being very separate entities, because at that point in my life, I was like, I'm going to get my BFA and I'm going to be on Broadway by the time I'm 24. And we all know that's not how that works. I was very naive. And so COVID kind of put that into my life. And then it made me look back and realize how many of the things that I did were kind of pointing me to this point. Because a theater teacher of mine has been telling me since I was a really little kid that I was a student of the theater. And I never really got what he meant until after I graduated, which sorry, Brian. But the way that I would dig into scripts that I was reading or performing in, that is now what I do when I write, of oh, why are they saying this? Is this the most effective way to say it? What are they really saying? What's the subtext? And so, and even the activities I did, I don't know if you know what Odyssey of the Mind is. It's kind of this competition where you do a skit and it has to have different components depending on the prompt that you pick. But I would write the scripts for that in the 5th grade. That's playwriting. But I never associated the fact that I like to write and I like to read and I like that academic part with the staging part. And it's kind of embarrassing that it took as long as it did to kind of bring those two things together. But that's how it happened.
Yeah, I mean, things go the way they're gonna go. I did Odyssey of the Mind as well.
Oh my gosh!
It was a crazy skit, let me tell you. There was building. It was a wild time, but I
Because
get
we
it.
always did the technical ones. We did like the balsa one. We did the like vehicle one. We never did the ones where it was just like, I'm now trying to remember the problem numbers, but like, isn't problem 5 always like just verb? Yeah, we would always do the technical ones. And so I never thought of it as playwriting because I'm like, no, we're doing this while they like make the tower on the side. But it was playwriting. Oh my gosh, the fact that you did Odyssey, that's crazy.
No, it's perfect. So like I really get it, like how it's my dog is going crazy. He's just excited, you know?
Oh no, he loves Odyssey of the Mind too.
You don't realize that writing is so integral, but it really is. If you could give yourself, like your younger self, writing Odyssey of the Mind scripts advice, what would you say to her?
Oof. I mean, part of me, like the very existential part of me is like, I don't want to warn her because she's going to have to go through the things that she has to go through in order to get to where we are. It's not that deep. Like, it's going to be okay. And the things that like you think are really embarrassing about yourself, or the things that you're like, I can't believe I said that, can't believe I did that, it'll all become like, it's all part of your arc. And there are things that like I went through when I was in high school or when I was really little, or like thoughts that I had that I'm like, I'm the only one who feels like this. Like those, you're not alone in that, and like it'll become valuable. Not that everything has to be writing material. I know that some people in my life are like, oh, are you going to write about this? Or are you going to write about that? It's not all writing material, but it all shows up in different ways. And so like, even when something goes wrong, that doesn't make it a waste. Or like when, like the first play that I submitted to that competition being like, oh my gosh, this is so great. Like, wow, look at me, I wrote a play. And just that sense of accomplishment, I lost and I was devastated. And I was like, dang. But the fact that I lost is why I kept going. And so, you know.
I'm going to take that advice to heart because
you got it.
I know that all too well, girl. Trust me. I'm so glad I have you on because this is inspiring to me. I mean, I can't
gosh. Oh,
think because a sense of community can do so much, and it's so hard when you feel like you don't have that. Beautiful. She's on her way to be like a public speaker. Motivation.
Oh my gosh. No one needs my TED Talk. No one needs my TED Talk.
We do. We've talked a bit about your career, which is very insightful, but we're going to move on to the craft, which we have a lot to talk about here because your craft is beautiful.